We didn't launch on time. We didn't land on time, but we did do everything right. So here we are on one of our walkouts, and we're told that this is actually the real one. We're going. You might see there's a little skepticism in some of our faces there, but it turned out that it was really going to be go weather, and we got out there about 3 hours prior to launch. Here I am to give you an idea of what it's like climbing up into the commander's seat. And it's a good thing we have a lot of help, otherwise we'd still be there trying to get in. And here, just we move the camera around, and here you get a chance to see Pam working her way in. Now the camera view is up on the front nose looking backwards, and that was Bill getting in. And down in the mid-deck, that was Jeff over there. And here we are finally at the big moment, and I'll let the first-time flyer talk about engine start and the ascent.
Well, we'd waited so long, I didn't really believe it until the solid rocket boosters lit, and then there was no doubt in our mind. And you'll see here, it's kind of interesting. There's the main engine's light, and we're holding, and then when the SRB's light, there's a huge difference. And obviously, you really know you're going somewhere in a hurry. It was an enormous jolt, not really like anything that I can compare to in an airplane, but it left no doubt in our mind that we were going somewhere in a big hurry. We actually saw these clouds go by, and that was a wonderful sight, as Brian mentioned, to actually go up into the sun again. And here, of course, the solid rocket boosters are separating, coming up on 2 minutes, and then we were left on the main engines. And this is what it looked like from the inside. Quite a bright glare. But the ride really smoothed out after that, and just on the 3 engines, you can see them glowing there, continuing our way uphill. And there was a special moment for me when we passed 50 nautical miles, and I magically became a flown astronaut.
Shortly after being in orbit, the first thing we have to do is we have to turn the rocket ship that we just rode into space on and turn it into the spaceship that we're going to have to live and work on for the next 2 weeks. And here you see a bit of a speed up of what it looks like opening the payload bay doors. They're really not quite that quick. I did mention earlier that we get into the rendezvous right away. And here, if you watch the OMS pods on the back, you'll see there's the OMS engine's light. You can see the camera jolt there from the OMS engines. And eventually, those maneuvers brought us around to this view here, which is what we saw a still of earlier, and that was looking up through the centerline camera. Pam had mentioned that everybody has a job to do during the rendezvous, and that is certainly the case. And everyone had a key role to do, and we all worked together very well as a team, and things went just the way we wanted to. We flew around to being above the space station. Here you see us at about 170 feet. We held there until we were in the right place over the ground, at which it was time for us to start in. And then we closed in to 30 feet, where we evaluated that target that you see right in the middle. We determined that the orbiter and the space stations were in perfect alignment. There was no adjustment that was going to be required. Here you can see in the cockpit the fact that everyone's working. And here's the, as we're approaching for the final docking, looking out the overhead window past me. I was looking at this scene right here because it's my job just to keep that centered up. And to tell you the truth, I'm glad I wasn't looking out the back window. It was too close. But here we are in the last couple of inches, and you can see the two surfaces come together very well. Inside, there's about a couple of seconds of high-fiving and a little celebration. And then Mike looks up and verifies that the lights, the moting lights on the space station were indeed flashing, indicating that it was in free drift. Bill then took over and was running the docking system and bringing the interfaces close together. And then once that was done, it was time to go to work.
Shortly after we docked, we entered the node, and it's pretty interesting entering a different space vehicle. You know, you saw what it was like getting into the shuttle, and it's quite a bit different when you're all unencumbered and floating. We had to wait for some time for the seals to relax before we actually opened the hatch, and you kind of poked through the window there and got a glimpse of what it looked like inside. That hatch, I'm guessing, weighs a few hundred pounds, but it doesn't weigh much in space. At least it doesn't seem like it. And this is Brian just sort of floating right in. You see how spacious it is, no pun intended, going into the node. And especially after being in the cramped confines of the middeck, which were exacerbated by all the stowage that we had, going into the node was kind of like going into a playground or going outside into a playground. As we sort of one by one made our way in there, as Koichi pointed out earlier, it was very easy to get disoriented inside in kind of a pleasant way. The node being so symmetrical, it was tough to keep straight which way was up, which didn't really matter in the final analysis, and unless you were looking for something that you had put somewhere and invariably was elsewhere when you went to go get it.
Okay, this is Bill and I, and also Pam, working on the in-flight maintenance to replace the space vision unit and also provide the contingency power. Since the ground came up really thought planned in a very timely manner, and we could do the in-flight maintenance really quickly. So we could do the Z1 installation without much delay. This is computer graphics. It's actually a bird's eye view, although in space there's no bird flying, so it's difficult to explain. But this is how we operated the robot arm to install to the Unity module. And actually the motion is much slower, and we did very carefully and slowly. This is a camera view of Z1. What you can see is the bottom portion of the Z1, which was installed on the cargo bay. This is a final approach of the Z1, and Mike was already inside of the Unity module giving me guidance. And after the installation of the Z1, we started to work inside of the space station, and everybody is in the Unity module here. And a lot of units hanging out. Again, this is the Unity module. As we mentioned earlier, I felt it was difficult to orient myself to know which direction is up or zenith or port or nadir.
Coming down through the station back into the shuttle. This is the shuttle airlock we're entering now, and you can see the two spacesuits poised for the first EVA there. They had been checked out previously, and here's a nice picture of Jeff getting Bill and I suited up to get ready to go out on EVA 1, getting Bill's glove on there. Here's a picture of us getting our tools over at one of the toolboxes that we eventually installed onto Z1, and you can see in space you can orient yourself any way that'll work to get what you need done. Here's a picture of Bill getting the arm set up. He's putting a foot restraint onto the arm. He's attaching that, and then he's going to stand in it and lock his boots in. And he and I switched places on EVAs 1 and 3, getting driven around on the arm. And here's a picture of Bill working on some cables there. This is the SASA antenna that we relocated. Bill's got it in his hands there. He's attached to the robot arm, and I'm assisting him there in a foot restraint. We temp stowed that, and that'll get put on by the next flight to launch in just a few days. This was the part that we were most worried about on EVA-1, and this was the KU band antenna that we launched up on Z1. Bill had to grab that and manually pull it out on the arm, and then I helped him attach it, and then we were able to deploy it and swing it out of the way to make room for the P6 that's going up on the next flight. This was really a spectacular sight in space, watching this big structure swinging out, and hopefully this will make the IMAX movie, and you'll be able to see it in a couple of years.
Well, after EVA-1 was completed, you can see Bill backing up Koichi on the arm, and Leroy's taking over the checklist, and it was time for Mike and I to go outside and start on EVA-2. Here you can see a graphic of what happens on EVA-2. We had to release the PMA from the structure, and then Koichi would bring it around the arm and stick it over the front of the cabin here on the node. And of course, in actuality, Koichi doesn't move the arm that fast. Here you can see Mike and I unbolting it from the structure that holds it, a Spacelab pallet that holds the docking adapter in the bay, and here it's released, and Koichi is starting his arm operations to move it up out of the bay. And as it transitions up the station, the next scene is a nice one at night. A lot of this was done at night. You can see it passing one of the solar arrays here, and Mike is working in the foreground, carrying out some circuit boxes that are going to be used on a later flight downstream. And here it is being attached to the station. This is part of the space vision system locking on to the dots here that help guide it in, and you can see Mike up here getting ready to give directions to Koichi to help stick it onto the node. And this is what's going on inside the cabin. Koichi is, of course, operating the arm, and Pam is operating the computer that drives the bolts and the capture latch mechanism to capture the mechanism. And here you can see the 4 ready to latches lighting up, meaning it's ready to be captured and then bolted onto the station. And everybody's really happy because it's worked as planned. And you can see here Koichi getting his high fives for the great work that he's done. After it was bolted on, Mike went over and started undoing all the umbilicals so that they could be attached, and I got on top of the arm to move over the nose of the orbiter to help attach those umbilicals. It helps to have kind of a person on the arm as a stable platform and a free floater to help kind of run around and get everything that's needed to do, and with the 2 of us working there over the nose of the cabin, you can see the cables were done.
We've mentioned a couple of times the IMAX camera, and we do have some payload bay footage from the IMAX cargo bay camera 3D, and we also had a 3D in-cabin camera. And this is one huge camera, and the film, as you can imagine, is just gigantic, and so it takes a lot of work to handle that. And you can see Pam having a little success when she's finally gotten the film loaded. Now, for EVA 3, we were going to continue outfitting Z1. In that first picture, Leroy had just released the first DC to DC converter unit, and then he moved that around and attached it to the starboard side of Z1. We had 2 of those, and then there were additional components to move. Here, Koichi is Leroy is attaching the second toolbox that we had carried up on the back of the Spacelab pallet. You may recall there was a keel pin located right here on the bottom of Z1 attached to those 2 lugs. Here it is being repositioned over to this location by Leroy, so it'll be ready for, it'll be out of the way for the next mission. And then Leroy is here finishing connecting the final umbilicals to PMA 3. And at this point, we can see that we've just about gotten most of Z1 configured.
On the 4th and final EVA, we were primarily concerned with getting some tasks done for the following flight, including clearing off the Zenith surface to attach the P6 truss to, and then also to deploy the tray, which is a little difficult to see in the picture. That tray has some fluid lines on it, which will be connected to the lab first and then to the S0 truss. This is the safer DTO that I was speaking of earlier. Here you see Jeff free-floating here. He is attached to a tether, which conveniently just disappeared, so it looks like he is truly free-floating. We tried talking NASA into that, but they wouldn't let us do it. Our first goal here was to just do some maneuvers to get some familiarity with the flying qualities of the vehicle, and then we wanted to demonstrate sort of a simulated self-rescue. So we wanted to get as far away as we possibly could that they'd let us, and then fly a flight staying within range of the person who was always on the end of the arm. And this is a shot of Jeff, whose flight was at night. You can see his 2 helmet lights quite clearly. The target that he's flying to is actually the camera that's being used to shoot this video. And this is the end of my flight. As I approach that camera, you can see this is the hand controller module here, which is Velcroed to my spacesuit, and this is the actual controller itself. And you can see as I put these inputs in, you'll see a result in my trajectory. The controller can either put in rotational or translational movements depending on the position of one of the switches. That whole flight for both of us was even a level above the excitement that we normally have during an EVA. We went into the FGB then after that fourth EVA on the next day, and mostly did a very small amount of transfer. You can see again how it's fairly tight quarters in there. There is a lot of stowage in the closet, but like a lot of closets, we can't get everything we need to inside, so we ended up having to put a lot of it outside. Pam and Bill in this view are attaching a camera target which we use to berth the lab, and then finally Brian, in fine Navy tradition, rings the bell to announce our departure as we leave and close the hatch for the final time on an uninhabited space station.
Well, as I talked about earlier, undocking was a really special moment for us. It was sad to leave the station, but it was wonderful to see all the physical evidence of the work that we'd done. It was a lot like the Rendezvous in the sense that everybody has a job to do. I guess it's probably pretty obvious that the only time they let the pilot fly is though when you're getting further away from the station rather than when you're getting closer to it. That's all right. This is kind of a neat shot because you can see that we're actually separating in a way that is not usual. We were separating laterally. That's something that hadn't been done before, and you can see we're pretty excited that the procedure worked and everything went exactly as planned. It was really personally rewarding for me to fly the shuttle this way. You can kind of see I'm making actually some controller inputs using the rotational hand controller. It's not something we usually do. We don't usually change our attitude manually, and so that was just really fun for me to see how the shuttle flew. But here, of course, you can see once again the Z1 truss and the PMA and the antenna. Really, really special.
Because of the unfavorable weather condition at the Kennedy Space Center, we had some extra time to stay in orbit, and we could enjoy the microgravity environment. Here is our commander's zero-G ballet. As you can see, middeck is pretty small, but look at how balanced he is, and he went on and on without touching any part of the middeck. And also, I had to do a very carefully controlled, highly technical fluid dynamics experiment. That was a strike. And also, I had to do this, and even I could throw a straight ball, and look at how good his batting is. I almost ate it. Okay, Jeff is getting really serious now. Here's another fast pitch by Bill of a chocolate. Whoa! Here's another one, and Mike is working on the bicycle machine, and he was always cool in space, and that was a good pitch of Bill.
Well, with the main objectives finished and the food gone, the film gone, everything else gone, it was time to come home finally. And we got in our suits, and here you see the assembly line in work where Pam's getting right in her suit. And our entry was pretty much in daylight the whole time, and as we were coming in, it was the first time I'd seen the Earth at low altitude at real high speed, like Mach 25, and it was really flying by. But it was like the world on fast forward. And we came into Edwards Air Force Base on a beautiful day, and we're coming in a runway 22, a very familiar sight. This view out the heads-up display that you can see, and we have our velocity vector pointed right on an aim point there, that black rectangle that you see. And about 2,000 feet, we started our transition from being on the outer glide slope to the inner glide slope. We're going to come in to land at about 400 feet. Which is right about here. Pam puts the gear down, and then we just make a transition from that point down to where we want to touch down, and we're aiming at a point that's about 2,500 feet down the runway, and we just come in with the wheels down, thank goodness, and come in and we touch down about right where we wanted, and Pam put the drag chute out at 185 knots. Here you can see it deploying, and it actually disreefs in stages. You can see it's fully disreefed there before the nose wheel came down. So actually the touchdown of the nose wheel was actually relatively soft. And after about 45 minutes, we were out of the vehicle, got out of our suits and some flight suits, and came out to look at the orbiter. And thus ended an incredible journey and an incredible mission.